So I just wanted to thank Diane Robinson for this story, because we ran a competition on YouTube, as some of you guys already know, and it was really around trying to get the first story and get you guys involved, because I love hearing people's titles and the stories that they have. So congratulations to Diane Robbins for the $100 voucher you got. Here's your story called Baby in the Attic. Now, if you guys love this story, before we get started, please subscribe to my channel and turn on that like notification, and you'll hear more and more of these. I'll be posting constantly through the week. Let's get down to the story. So the story's called, as I mentioned, Baby in the Attic. Let's go. Michael was 13 when he finally conjured up the courage to go up into the manhole into the attic and find out where the crying had come from. Because for 3 years now, he's heard this baby crying in the house, and he's never known where it's coming from. It was pretty easy to dismiss, because a few short months after his dad's girlfriend moved in, she fell pregnant and had a baby. See, Michael was 9 at the time, so he was still upset that his mum and dad had broken up. But the 9 months that followed during her pregnancy was just pure hell for Michael, because Summer just wanted Michael out of the house. She didn't want him around. She just wanted the dad all to herself and to have this perfect fairy tale, pregnancy. She even said to Michael, "It's my first child, and I don't want some snot-nosed little shit like you to wreck my experience." She hated Michael being in the house, and to make things worse, his dad was a travelling salesman. So his dad would be gone from weeks, even months at a time, and travel all around America, throughout Europe, and even as far as Australia. So Michael was left a lot of the time with this new stepmom, if you will. This was tough on Michael, but not even Michael. It was tough on the dad's new girlfriend. I mean, Michael had never had to experience another woman in the house, or even especially somebody that was a new mother figure to him, let alone that Summer, the new girlfriend, had to experience, being a mother to a 9-year-old, plus being pregnant while her partner was away travelling. But for Michael, it was more than that. There was something about Summer that was just evil. He just couldn't put his finger on it. But he told his dad all the time and said, she's mean to the dog. I don't think she's right for us. And his dad would just dismiss it, because obviously he was in love with Summer, and, they had a baby on the way. So Michael was more of a problem to them both. Michael first picked up on Summer's evilness when he saw her starting to interact with the dog, because Michael's dad had this little sausage dog that he loved. It was his pride and joy. He'd sit it on his lap, and the dog would be on the couch with him, and what have you. But Michael saw Summer being really evil to this dog. I mean, she'd kick the dog outside, and she wouldn't feed it, and she wouldn't give it water, and there's a whole bunch of things that she did. But the thing that stood out the most was the little dog died. Now, how did it die? They had this balcony. It was up high on the 3rd level, and somehow the dog, named Buster, fell off the rail. Whether it went through the rail or over the rail, nobody knows, but it hit the concrete below and died. Now, Michael's dad was so upset by this, and this was before Summer had actually moved in, so it was really the thing that, opened up this gap for Summer to come in and fill a void for the dad. Michael's dad wanted to work out a way to have the dog buried, and he wanted to have a little funeral for his pride and joy that had fallen off the balcony. And Summer, his new girlfriend, had said, "Look, I'll organise it and I'll get something sorted out." But when the dad got home, she'd said that she took it to the vet, and the vet said, "We can cremate the dog, so your partner doesn't have to go through all the heartache." So she told this to Michael's dad, but what ended up happening was Michael was walking home just a couple of days later, when he was crossing the street, and the old lady from across the road came out and she said to Michael, you know, you need to tell your stepmom that it's not a nice thing to do as a human to put dead dogs in the wheelie bin. And Michael was like, what? What do you mean? And the lady said, your stepmom, I saw her put that dog in the bin. And Michael was so gobsmacked by this. He didn't know what to do, and he didn't know what to say. Like, should he approach his dad or should he approach Summer? But at the time, he didn't want to say anything because he was always in trouble. So he just kept it quiet. As soon as Summer moved into the house with Michael and his dad, things really started to change dramatically for Michael. You know, and he remembers this well because when she moved in, he started to get really sick. He told his dad about it and said to him, Dad, it's every time that I have dinner here and I eat, I feel ill and I vomit everywhere. And his dad was like, no, it's just in your head. And this continued for a couple of days over and over again. And Michael turned around to his dad and he said, I think it's something that Summer's doing. I think Summer's cooking something and putting it in my food. And his dad got that angry at him and dismissed it and said, don't ever talk about Summer like that again. But Michael was right, and his dad went off to a business trip a few weeks later, and before you knew it, Michael had just had dinner with Summer and he was vomiting everywhere. Everywhere. He remembers like in a pool of vomit and screaming out to Summer, I'm so sick, please take me to hospital. But Summer refused. She just stood there laughing at him as he was throwing up everywhere. He ended up passing out during that ordeal and waking up in a hospital bed, which he was spun out by. He was like, you know, what happened to me? But it was actually lucky for him because his mum was coming over to the house to bring him a school jacket because he had left his jacket at his mum's house from when he was staying there. And she turned up at the door and had seen him convulsing and vomiting everywhere and rushed him to hospital, which Michael at the time thought was great when he found this out. The scary part about this whole thing for Michael was the doctors had actually found traces of rat poison in his bloodstream. So for Michael, when he heard this, he was rapt. He was like, look, this is going to be the thing to prove that Summer's evil, that this woman's, you know, crazy. But to his dismay, Summer had taken photos of rat poison in his bedroom at home, and she'd already built a case to the doctors, the police, Michael's mother and his father that he was the one that was actually trying to poison Summer because he was jealous. Well, that's what she said, that he was jealous of the relationship between her and her father and also the relationship that she was having with her baby. In fact, the weeks that he had to stay with his dads, he pretty much just stayed in his room and kept out of their way, which for Summer was perfect because this allowed her to live this fairy tale life that she was after. But the last couple of months, she just turned crazy. I mean, she wouldn't even allow Michael's dad to go to an ultrasound, a doctor's, nothing. She just kept everybody away, which was really odd. But Summer was in this groove where she just didn't want anyone to be involved in her world. For his dad, this was pretty heartbreaking because he wanted to be involved, but Summer and the way she acted sort of just pushed the dad away. So Michael's dad just drifted further and further away and buried himself more and more into work. And for Michael, he just stayed in his room more and more. And for him, that was fine because out of sight, out of mind with her in the house. So that's how things went for the next couple of months. When she finally had the baby, his dad wasn't even in town. He was in Australia and Michael was at his mum's house for the whole week because Summer didn't want anyone around when she had the baby. So she didn't want the stress, and she even said, I don't want some snot-nosed little kid around my baby. So during those moments, or weeks, they did their own thing. When she named the baby Spring, which Michael and his mum thought was hilarious because her name was Summer and now she's named her daughter Spring, which was pretty odd. But either way, Spring was pretty cute. But even during this time, things were tough for Michael too, because he didn't see it at the time, but his mum was getting even more sick. Every time he saw her, she started to lose her hair, and to his horror, he started to spend more and more time at Summer and his dad's house. Over the coming months, even his scheduled weeks with his mum were getting cut short. She was getting sicker and sicker, so he would have to stay longer and longer with Summer and his dad, which he hated, but he didn't understand why he couldn't go to his mum's house. But he did notice the more hair she lost, she'd put a scarf on her head, and she was just getting sicker and sicker. It was only just a couple of weeks before Christmas and his mum passed away. She finally succumbed to cancer, and Michael was more alone than he'd ever been in his whole life. His dad, unfortunately, was flat out with work, and he was under a lot of pressure and stress financially with his company. So he was away even more often, and with his mum dying, Michael found himself full time in Summer's care, which he hated, and he just sort of became more and more absorbed into his own room with his headphones on and doing his own thing. And Summer, it suited Summer perfectly. She did her own thing with her baby, and cry, and he'd just be in his room. Summer's attitude towards him, you would think, would be somewhat supportive, but it couldn't be further from the truth. You see, without his mum around to protect him anymore, Summer really just started to do whatever she wanted. But it didn't work out so well for Summer, because baby Spring just cried and cried. I mean, when I say cried, this baby cried all day and then all night. Nobody ever knew when it slept it cried that much in the house. And this drove Summer crazy. But for Michael, he just put his headphones on and go into his room and spend more and more time there. For the most part, Michael spent most of his days at school anyway, but he'd leave 2 hours early and he wouldn't arrive home until nightfall. Now, there was two main reasons he did this. Number one was to avoid Summer, because she was just evil to him and she wanted her own space, so that was perfect for him. But the second reason really was to avoid the crying, because the baby Spring was crying all day and all night, and she would cry all through the day, even when he was leaving for school, and then all through the night. And he'd fall asleep with headphones on most nights, but he could still hear the baby crying. And Summer hated the crying too. Although Michael never left his room, he could hear her from his bedroom. She'd be banging the walls and screaming and smashing things and saying, "Shut up, just leave me alone, just leave me alone." So she'd do that sometimes for hours as well, until she'd fall asleep herself. But life itself didn't get too much better for Michael. Just a year after his mum passed, his dad went missing. The police came and interviewed both Michael and Summer, and there was a big focus on Summer because she was the only adult, and nobody had reported his father missing. The reason that they found out that he was missing is because nobody at work had seen him for more than 4 weeks. For Summer, she said that she thought that he was at work because he was a travelling salesman, right? So, makes sense. But for the work, they said, well, we just thought he wasn't coming to work. The father's work had called, but Summer, being that geared up on drugs, she never answered the phone because she was stressed to the eyeballs and depressed because of all the screaming through the day and the night. So she never answered the phone. His work thought he was at home and quit his job, and Summer told the police that she thought that he was just travelling to maybe Europe or Australia or something like that. Didn't seem to gel too well, but Michael had the opportunity to talk to the police, but being a minor, they didn't really listen to him too much. But he told the police and said, "I think she killed my dad. I think she did it." Or had something to do with him disappearing. But the police dismissed everything that Michael said, because when Summer spoke to them, the very first thing she said is, Michael's very distressed, and a year or so ago, he also tried to poison me with rat poison that we found in his bedroom, and she produced all these photos again and all this sort of stuff and just totally wiped out anything Michael had to say. The police ended up putting his dad's disappearance down as a missing person because there was no evidence to prove anything, that Summer had done anything or anyone else had done anything. When they interviewed Summer, they found out that she was such a nutbag and so depressed and geared up on drugs because of this crying baby all the time. They were kind of like, well, this poor guy has probably just run away. I mean, he's got a crazy wife. He's got a baby that just constantly cries the whole time. And, like, what would you do? I mean, it was kind of understandable. Although it was all sad, Michael really didn't feel too bad about his dad going. I mean, he was upset because he had to stay with Summer, but at the end of the day, his dad really didn't back him too much and he didn't really spend too much time with him. In fact, he was more angry at his dad still because he blamed his dad for the divorce between his mum and him and disrupting and breaking up their whole family. What he didn't see coming, though, is that Summer became his legal guardian. Without a mother and without a father and no other relatives around, Summer just naturally became his guardian. But she was desperate for the insurance money and to take ownership of the house that they lived in. She kept saying to Michael, once I get that money, I'm out of here. Once I get this house, I'm going to sell it and I'm out of here. She seemed to hate the house, hate Michael and hate everything about everyone. But it didn't go so well for Summer because Michael's dad wasn't pronounced dead. He was pronounced missing. He disappeared. So for the insurance company, they weren't going to pay out on something that they weren't 100% sure on. So part of that process is that they had to wait a few years before she could access any money or the ownership of the house. The advantage for this for Michael was because he was the dependent of his father, Summer had to be nice to him. Well, reasonably nice anyway. In the time that followed, Michael pretty much stayed in his room full time and listened to music, and Summer kicked and screamed and yelled at the baby out in the lounge room and throughout the house. He just heard it night after night after night, put his headphones on and just got through it. At times, though, Michael started to think he was going crazy. He'd wake up in the middle of the night and think that he saw his dad standing over near the door. When he'd get up and walk over, his dad would all of a sudden disappear. A few times he'd open the door and look through and all of a sudden then see his dad standing in the hallway. And his dad would be waving at him like he's trying to tell him to come here. But he was too freaked out to do that. I mean, there was a couple of reasons. One, it was always at 3:07 a.m. But the main reason was because Summer was out there and that baby was crying and screaming. And he didn't want to walk out in the dark. He just put his headphones back on and assume that, maybe he's just seeing things. But sometimes it did break his heart a little bit because he'd look at his dad and, he'd feel bad that he never really had a relationship. He didn't have his mum, he didn't have his dad, and he's stuck with this crazy woman that screams outside the room all the time and listens to this baby crying all day and all night. He would feel sorry for himself and sometimes just cry himself back to sleep. But it was on little baby Spring's 3rd birthday that things blew up for Summer. She absolutely lost the plot. It was a Saturday, and as usual, Michael stayed in his room on the weekends for as long as he could. I mean, he put his headphones on and his music, he'd take all of his snacks from school and from the cupboard and in his bag, and he would stay in the room for as long as he possibly could without using the bathroom. Now, on this particular night, which was Baby Spring's birthday, it was like 6 p.m. and it was getting dark outside and Michael was busting for the toilet. So he decided to go out and face the music. But as he walked into the lounge room, things were different today. I mean, it was pretty crazy still, but Summer was sitting in the chair just rocking back and forth like an absolute crazy woman. And Baby Spring was on the ground crying as usual, screaming and crying as usual. But there was a weird vibe about everything. And when Michael was standing there, Summer stood up out of her chair all of a sudden and turned to him and said, "I hate you, you miserable piece of shit of a kid." She took her cigarette out of her mouth and flicked it at the baby on the ground and said, "You win." Michael was just like super confused, trying to figure out what was going on. As he looked around the room though, he noticed that there was suitcases packed at the front door. As he looked back over at Summer, he heard a knock at the door. He walked over to the front door and opened the door. There's this guy standing there, maybe 25 years old. And the guy says, "Who are you?" Michael didn't respond. He just looked at this guy like, "What are you doing here?" And the guy just barged his way into the house and walked straight through. The guy walks into the lounge room and sees Summer. Summer's whole demeanour changes and she runs over to this guy all happy and jumps on top of him and cuddles him. And, you know, like they're kissing and smooching all over the place. And Michael's standing there going, what the hell is going on here? The guy looks down at baby Spring crying and screaming on the floor and he says, "Who's this whiny little thing?" And Summer turns around, looks straight at Michael and says, "It's this kid's sister." And then just turns around to him and says, "Let's go." The guy walks to the front door with Summer, picks up the bags that are sitting at the front door and they just leave. And Michael's like dumbfounded, like, what is happening? He hasn't been out of his room. It's like 6 p.m. at night and all this has just happened. He walks to the front door, opens the door and looks out and Summer's got in this car with this guy and just roared up the road in this old Mustang. And he doesn't see her again. Michael walks back into the house and sits down on the couch just looking around thinking, what the hell am I going to do? What has just happened? The kid's like 13 years old and he's got a baby screaming on the ground. And the mother's walked out with some random guy and packed up and looked like she's left. He doesn't know what to do. So, I mean, first things first, he goes to the kitchen and gets some food for baby Spring on the ground there and sits on the floor with her and just feeds her. And all of a sudden, she just stops crying. As night falls on the house, Michael doesn't know what's going on. The baby's now stopped crying, which is like undescribable, the silence that's happening right now. I mean, he can't even remember the last time that he hadn't heard that baby cry, whether it be day or night. It's just like silence. So he sits back down on the couch and just takes it in. All of a sudden, Michael wakes up. He's like, what's going on? He looks at his watch and it's 3 a.m. He looks around the room and he's like, what's going on here? He looks next to him and baby Spring is curled up next to him and she's fast asleep, out like a light. The house is pitch black. He quickly gets up and walks around the house looking for Summer or someone, but there's an eerie silence in the house. There's no one here. He walks back into the lounge room and sees still baby Spring's just laying on the couch. She's out like a light, asleep. He's thinking to himself, what just happened? I mean, maybe he fell asleep on the couch because he's never heard so much silence in the house before. But he has this eerie feeling about everything. As he's standing in the lounge room just looking at baby Spring asleep, he looks over at the hallway only to see his dad again standing there. And his dad's like waving him over, standing like this. Michael's like all freaked out about this. He's like, maybe I'm dreaming. Maybe I've got to be dreaming. So he walks to his bedroom thinking the opposite way, thinking, well, maybe it is a dream and I'll go see myself asleep in my bed. So he walks into his bedroom and as he opens the door, he hears crying start again. As loud as anything. He turns and he runs back into the lounge room. But baby Spring's still asleep on the couch. And the crying is going on and on and on. And all the hairs in the back of his neck go up and he doesn't know what to do. He looks up again and he sees his dad. His dad's there again in the hallway, just waving him. Come here. Telling him to come. Michael doesn't know what to do. He looks at his watch again and it's 3:06, just as the clock ticks to 3:07. As he walks over to the hallway where his dad's standing, he gets right near his dad and his dad all of a sudden disappears again. Michael stands there like, what just happened? As he looks down the hallway, he sees his dad standing down the end of the hallway. He's now waving him down from the bottom of the hallway. Michael starts to walk down, and as he gets halfway down, he sees his dad pointing up. He's just standing there pointing up. And Michael's like, what's he pointing at? And then he realizes his dad's pointing at the attic door, the manhole into the attic. And Michael's freaked out. The screaming's going on and on and on. And he's never been out of his room, to hear any of the screaming. He could hear it from his room, but he never knew where it was in the house. But now it's so loud, and now he knows it's not baby Spring. He's so freaked out, he doesn't know what to do, but he can see his dad. So he's like trusting what he's going to do. With every bit of him, everything inside of him telling him, Michael, do not go the rest of the way down the hall. Do not go in the manhole. Something inside of him just says, you need to do this. And his dad's still standing there pointing up. Michael goes over to the cupboard where they've got a ladder. He takes out the ladder and he takes out the torch and sets it up, props it up right underneath the manhole and starts to climb up. Standing on top of the ladder, he pushes the door open and he sticks his head up. The crying's insane. It gets so loud, and straight away Michael knows that the crying's coming from the attic. He's freaked out. He's like, I don't know what to do here. Should I keep going? He sticks his head up and gets the torch and starts shining the torch around in the attic. Straight away he sees his dad standing up in the far corner of the attic next to this massive box. And his dad starts waving him over. Michael's freaked out. He doesn't know what to do. He gets his full body into the attic. He gets the torch and he starts shining it around the attic to see if there's anything up there. The crying's insane. It's so intense now. He shines the torch over right where his dad is, and he slowly walks over to where his dad's standing right next to the box. As he gets there, he shines the torch down on the box and his dad disappears. He freaks out. The crying's insane. He thinks he's going mad. He just saw his dad, now he doesn't. He shines the torch down at the box, undoes the latch, and as he opens it, just a slight bit, the crying stops. And he stops and he's pitch black, silent. There's nothing happening. And as he opens the box right up, he sees the corpse of a baby. He gets his torch and he shines it in, and he looks at the label around the arm of the baby, and all of a sudden realizes it's baby Spring's twin sister. Michael treks back downstairs with the torch, climbs back down the stairs and walks to the lounge room where baby Spring's still sleeping. He picks up a phone and he calls the police. Police didn't take too long. Within maybe 15 minutes they arrive, and they go up into the attic and remove the baby corpse and start an investigation. Later in the morning, more police arrive and they start searching the house, and Michael starts to tell them the stories about Summer and what's happened and how things have got to this point. They also search underneath the house and find a shallow grave with Michael's dad in it. And all of a sudden, Michael realizes that Summer is the murderer. Presently to this day, Michael is a school teacher, primary school, and he has 2 kids of his own and a family. But Summer and the 25-year-old guy that she left with that day still have never been found.